This is an attempt by all three AUKUS nations to really re-inject some life and vigour into the Pillar 2 of AUKUS. Now, people might remember Pillar 1 is the first part of AUKUS. That's all about developing nuclear-powered submarines for Australia. But then Pillar 2 is an effort by all three countries to develop advanced military technology. But there has been a bit of a sense of drift around that. Also, some of the work that all three nations are doing at the moment simply isn't being made public for obvious reasons. So perhaps, one, to inject a bit more momentum in it, and two, to get a bit more publicity for what they've already been doing, the three nations have basically announced a new marquee project, which is developing payloads, in other words, weaponry, and the things that, and the missiles and the like that are shot, and also on top of that, sensors or sensory systems for underwater drones. Now, this, of course, comes at a time when all three countries are increasingly worried about the way that underwater drones can be used against us for surveillance as well as to target critical infrastructure. We heard yesterday from Richard Marles about the fact that we've seen this spate of sometimes mysterious, sometimes not so mysterious accidents with submarine cables targeted in places like the Taiwan Strait and in the Baltic Sea. And the argument from all three AUKUS nations is that if they pour more money into this sort of technology, then we're more likely to get a leading edge in a way that gives us a critical military advantage. Let's take a listen to John Healey, the UK Defence Secretary, and Richard Marles talking about this announcement late yesterday in Singapore.
For too long with AUKUS, we've talked too much and delivered too little. That has now changed under our three governments. And as President Trump has said, we're now full steam ahead on AUKUS.
We are announcing today the first signature project under Pillar 2, which will see all three countries invest in the development of cutting-edge payloads and enabling systems for uncrewed undersea vehicles, is a momentous occasion in what is the AUKUS journey. This is the three countries putting real money behind a capability that we will put into the hands of the warfighter next year.
All right, so that's one announcement to come out of that meeting. Were there any others?
Yeah, one other one just worth looking at briefly, Fauzia. The three countries again reaffirmed Pillar 1 of AUKUS and said they were pushing ahead with the plan for Australia to develop its own nuclear-powered submarines and acquire at least 3 Virginia-class submarines from the United States. One interesting shift, though. Originally, the plan was basically for Australia to get 2 second-hand Virginia-class submarines and then perhaps 1 new Virginia-class submarine straight off the production line. That's now changed. Essentially what the three countries said yesterday is that they would now look to get all 3 of those second-hand Virginia submarines or Virginia-class submarines from the US Navy, and from ones that are already underwater. So instead of getting 2 old and 1 new, we're now getting 3 old submarines. Now, there are 2 ways you can look at this. On the one hand, you can argue there's less complexity. It makes more sense. The 3 boats that we're likely to get now, assuming that, of course, the US president does sign off on it in the 2030s, are all going to be of the same type. That makes it easier for Australia to maintain them and look after them. On the other hand, it does mean that Australia is going to get 3 older boats rather than 2 older boats and 1 new boat. So there are questions then that arise from that. How much life does that shave off, the life of that submarine? Does that mean that Australia is getting a worse deal than it did when it was hoping to get 1 new submarine rolling off the US Virginia-class production line? So it is a little deep in the weeds, but it's interesting, and I think Richard Marles is likely to get further questions about this here in Singapore later today.